Hi, my name is Dr. Nikki Deering with Vitality Chiropractic. And today we're going to be talking about heart rate variability, what it is, how it's measured, and what it means for your health. So, the best place to start when talking about heart rate variability or HRV is at the beginning. And the beginning is the polyvagal theory. So, in case you're not familiar, the polyvagal theory is the work of Dr. Stephen Porges, who is a psychologist and a neuroscientist. And what his theory proposes is that it's the stresses in our life in a bigger degree to how we deal with those stresses that affect the way our body functions, how well we're able to connect with others, as well as our overall health. Now, a bigger part of the polyvagal theory is Dr. Porges states that our body is always trying to get to that state of ease or safety, and that all the changes that happen in our body occur when we're not feeling safe. The reason that this is so important is our body can only heal in the state of ease. It can't heal from a state of threat or defense, and we're going to learn more about that later on. So there are three organizing principles that make up the polyvagal theory. We have co-regulation, neuroception, and the autonomic hierarchy. So let's take a minute now and look at each of these one by one. The first one is co-regulation. So when we're born, up until we're kids of a certain age, we are unable to manage our emotions. We're unable to soothe ourselves when we're upset or sad, injured, hurt, scared, and we have no coping mechanisms. We have no past history in how to deal with the stresses in life. And as a result, we require somebody, a co-regulator, to provide that soothing for us, to model behaviors. And so this is often a parent or a caregiver. Now, let's talk about stress here for a second, because chiropractically speaking, we put stress into three different categories: physical, chemical, and emotional. So physical stress is any sort of physical impact to your body. This can be falls, accidents, things like that. Chemical stress refers to anything that you put into your body that doesn't belong there. So when you think about food that's available in the grocery store, we have food that is loaded with artificial colors, sweeteners, preservatives. Also, anything that we take in excess, whether good or bad, because anything in excess is not good for us. Chemical stress also includes things like medications, whether prescribed or recreational. Things that you don't think about, like viruses, bacteria. So really anything that gets into our body that causes problems. And then the last stress is emotional, and that one really doesn't need any sort of explanation. But again, with co-regulation, this is where we go to experience safety when we come up against a threat. But this is also how we learn how to manage those stresses that come into our life. Because remember, the polyvagal theory states our health, our well-being is affected by the stresses in life, but also to a bigger degree, how we've been conditioned to deal with those stresses. So a great way to illustrate that conditioning and how that happens is by looking at Bob Proctor's stick person figure. So in case you're not familiar with Bob Proctor, he was kind of like Canada's Tony Robbins before Tony Robbins existed. So in the early to mid 60s, Bob Proctor was the first self-help guy, and his way of teaching was teaching how to overcome those habits. And it's kind of falls really quite in line with polyvagal theory, at least in my humble opinion. So this first picture here shows you as you are today. So you notice you have this conscious mind that is thinking and is smart and can decide what's true for you and what's false, what you accept and what you reject. Now, once you've made up your mind for that, that information gets stored into your subconscious mind. Once it's in your subconscious, you don't have to think about it anymore. It becomes this automatic habit, or what Bob Proctor called a paradigm. Now, on the other side here, the figure that is missing that conscious mind, that's you as a child. That's me as a child. And again, from birth up until a child of a certain age, we lack that conscious mind to make up our mind for ourselves. And so what happens is everybody around us, their beliefs, their patterns, their habits, their coping mechanisms, their opinions, everything gets dumped into our subconscious mind and becomes the truth. Now, this inheritance really of all these coping mechanisms and beliefs can be great because this is how we learn how to show up in the world. However, it's also inherited information. So sometimes we can be inheriting coping mechanisms that maybe aren't the most appropriate. They could be something that just doesn't deal with what we're dealing with now. Because again, not only are we inheriting these coping mechanisms from the people around us, but we're also getting what they inherited in the people before them. So another way to look at it is we have our subconscious mind packed with coping mechanisms, beliefs, patterns, etc., that goes back generations. And again, sometimes this can be very useful, sometimes not so much, which leads to the second organizing principle of polyvagal theory, and that's neuroception. Neuroception refers to how your brain and your nervous system are constantly surveilling your interior and exterior environment. So looking at what's going on inside your body as well as what the senses tell your brain is going on in your immediate surroundings. And it's going to make these decisions based off of conditioning with how to deal with stress, but also your previous experiences. And again, this all happens without conscious awareness. It would drive you bonkers if you had to evaluate every single thing in your life as being safe or not. Now, again, because we inherited all that conditioning, sometimes we can have neuroceptive mismatches here. So what that means is sometimes, and think mostly with kids here, because I know personally from myself being younger and my kids, neuroception can mess up and see things as being safe that really aren't. What happens more commonly, especially as we become adults, is our brain reads things as danger that really isn't. So that's kind of the blessing and the curse of our brilliant brain is it can't tell the difference accurately all the time between what's a real threat and what's a perceived threat. The difference between a bear at your front door coming to get you or the caller ID saying it's somebody that you don't want to talk to. Either way, it's going to cause the same changes and adaptations in your body, which leads us to the last organizing principle, which is the autonomic hierarchy. So we're going to put a pin in it right here and just jump into a very quick anatomy lesson. So you may or may not remember from high school biology, I guess it would be. Our nervous system has several different divisions. One of them is the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is responsible for automatically managing the systems of our body and making sure that they're all in perfect balance. The autonomic nervous system is also divided into that sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and we're going to be talking about that here in just a little bit. You'll see all these nerves coming off of the brain that are numbered. These are referring to cranial nerves. So when people think of nerves or they say they have a pinched nerve, what they're talking about are spinal nerves. And spinal nerves are different where they branch off of our spinal cord and they go to different muscles and organs. Cranial nerves, on the other hand, branch off of our brainstem. And these usually end up in sensory organs. So our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth. One of these nerves in particular, cranial nerve 10, is the one that we're going to be focusing on. And this is the one that has the biggest impact on heart rate variability. So the other name for cranial nerve 10 is your vagus nerve. And vagus nerve is important for a couple different reasons. One, it's the longest cranial nerve that you have in your body. And two, it's really responsible for allowing your body to adapt to any sort of threat because you want to have changes in your body to make it where you can defend yourself against this threat. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. This is also what gets measured with heart rate variability because the job of the vagus nerve, 80% of this nerve's function is sensory. And so what that means is it gathers information from your senses, so eyes, ears, nose, mouth, also from different sensory receptors throughout your body. And so what it does is it brings all of that information up to your brain for processing. The other 20% of this nerve's function is motor, meaning it sends directions from your brain out to your body. Now, 20% doesn't sound like a lot. However, it's easier to show you the very small list, and I mean, it's a handful, a very short list, of where this nerve doesn't go than to tell you all the organs that this nerve does send information to. One of those organs that this nerve sends information to is your heart. And so in times of stress and times of sorrow, this nerve is going to control how fast your heart beats. And that's what heart rate variability is looking at. So heart rate variability measures beat to beat, how long that takes. And that should vary because, again, our body is designed to adapt to life. We're not meant to be stagnant. We're meant to have good and bad, all of this in our life. So to better look at that, let's look at this autonomic hierarchy. And so this is looking at the autonomic nervous system as a ladder. And this comes from the work of Deb Dana, who is also a psychologist. And so, and to be fair, this is looking at the different stages of your autonomic nervous system in times of threat. So there are times where your heart rate can go faster when you're not feeling threatened. There's times when we can be immobilized without fear. We're not talking about that today. So the autonomic hierarchy is looking at how these different threats and stresses, and again, a bigger degree, how you condition or how you're conditioned to deal with those, how these affect your body. So one other quick anatomy lesson before we go further. Another part of the polyvagal theory is Dr. Porges proposed that our vagus nerve has evolved over time. And so the dorsal branch is the more primitive branch of our vagus nerve. That part of our vagus nerve is not conditioned, but it deals more with keeping us alive. So it's just the primal, most basic needs is what the dorsal vagal or that posterior, that older branch of vagal does. Ventral vagal is the newer branch. This is what allows us to be social with other people. In fact, our vagus nerve, the way that it exits our skull, it's very close to two other cranial nerves. And so when the vagus nerve isn't functioning very well, and what causes it not to function well, to lose its tone, is the stress in life, but it's going to affect those other nerves as well. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. So you see, at the top of this ladder is when ventral vagal is activated. So another way to look at this is that nervous system is in a state of ease. It's in a state of balance. It's in a state of safety. And when this happens, our brain, our nervous system is able to coordinate and control every other system of our body in perfect harmony. So picture like a conductor of an orchestra keeping everybody together. In this state, we're at ease. Health and healing can happen. We're better connected with ourselves. We can connect with other people. Really, we're just our best self. Now, when stress comes into our life, whether real or imagined, or if we're just not dealing with that stress in a way that's beneficial to us, we move down the ladder into one of two states. So the first one here is sympathetic activation. Another way of looking at this is fight or flight. When we get into sympathetic, that means our neuroception has looked at this threat and decided this is something that we could probably outrun or we can beat it. And so what happens is the nervous system, the brain goes from coordinating and controlling all of those systems to now focusing only on the systems that are going to keep us alive in this situation. Because this situation is only meant to be a temporary thing. So what happens is our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, causes our cholesterol to go up. Blood's going to move to our arms and legs and get us ready to fight or flee. Emotionally, we're going to feel on edge, ready to go, maybe anxious, angry, short-tempered, just type A, like you're ready to go, ready to go. If a neuroception, our brain and nervous system decide, you know what, this is a stress that we're not going to be able to handle, we're not going to be able to run from. Or again, if your coping mechanisms have you kind of stuck, what happens is we go into this dorsal vagal activation. So this is a very primitive way that we respond to stresses in life. Another way to look at this one would be freeze or fawn. So think about if you've ever encountered a lizard and you scare it, it plays dead. Same thing with a possum. Fainting goats, those are fun. But that's what happens here with the dorsal vagal. So kind of the opposite of sympathetic, where instead of getting ready to fight, our whole body gets geared up for slowing down and hiding, kind of like that guy who's hiding under the stairs there. We want to be quiet. We want to go inside. We want to go unnoticed. And the plan is to let this stress pass. I'm not going to deal with it right now. Our coping mechanisms are just, and so we just wait for that to pass. What happens here is kind of the opposite again of sympathetic. So instead of those muscles, the blood being shunted out to our muscles so we could mobilize or fight, all that blood's going to come inwards. And so it's just going to be taking care of those most vital internal organs. Everything else is going to slow down. We're just riding out this storm until it passes. Emotionally, we can feel depressed, withdrawn, numb, disassociated. We just kind of want to be in our own little world with nobody else. Medically speaking, when we're in this state, this is often where we get what are referred to as medically unexplained symptoms. So this includes things like fibromyalgia, irritable bowel, migraines, chronic fatigue, and also POTS, which is kind of new on the scene, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So when you stand up, your blood pressure drops and you pass out. All of those are very real diseases, but they're medically unexplained because there's no lab, there's no x-ray that's going to confirm or deny that you have it. It's more they've ruled out everything else and this is what you're left with, which from a patient perspective stinks. My history before being a chiropractor is working as a nurse, and I know firsthand it's really frustrating to be told this is what you have because we can't figure out anything else. But the truth of the matter is these conditions are the result of dysregulation within your nervous system. In fact, all of our health concerns rather, 90% of them are due to stress. And so what's important to note with this picture is in this ladder, you are meant to go up and down on a regular basis. So the top, regardless of the amount of stress in your life, is not out of reach for you. In fact, you probably get there a couple times, if not more, throughout the day. The name of the game here and what heart rate variability is measuring is where do you spend the bulk of your time? Because in a perfect world, we're meant to be in a state of ease, encounter stress, deal with stress, and then stress should pass, allowing us to get back to the top of the ladder. Unfortunately, in the world that we live in, the stresses just keep coming. And what happens is we find ourselves spending more time at the bottom of this ladder than we do at the top. And again, remember, at the bottom of the ladder, our nervous system is focused only on survival, keeping us safe, keeping us alive. That isn't good for our health. We need all of the systems of our body to be in perfect harmony and working together. And that only happens when we get to the top. So you might be asking, how do I get to the top? How do I improve vagal tone? That's an excellent question. So a couple things you can do. So I mentioned before when we were looking at cranial nerves that a couple other cranial nerves, when vagal tone is low, which happens in result to stress, it impacts these nerves as well. So during times of stress, the nerves that are impacted are going to affect your hearing. So it tunes you into more low primal, what's the word I'm looking for? Predator tones. And so how this plays out in real life is, say you're very stressed or you're at the doctor and you're getting some serious news. This is why they always tell you, bring a second set of ears with you, bring somebody with you, because in times of stress, we have a hard time hearing at that tone of human voice. Another is it's going to impact the tone of our voice and sometimes can even affect your ability to swallow or hum, which sounds crazy, but I've seen it firsthand that when that cranial nerve, which I believe is cranial nerve 12, is affected, it's going to impact the tone of your voice, leave you kind of monotone, and again, can make even swallowing difficult. And then the last one is a cranial nerve 7, which controls the muscles of your face. And I think even to a degree, cranial nerve 5. But again, when you're in that dorsal vagal, because that's mostly where these come in, you get that face that doesn't move. So put that in combination with a monotone voice and kind of a stone face, you can almost see stress on people. So ways to improve the tone would be working on those other nerves as well. So things like singing, gargling, humming, that's why all of those improve vagal tone, because you're actually improving the vagal tone of the nerves that travel with it. Other things would be meditation, yoga, exercise, deep breathing. So anything that brings calm and ease to your nervous system. Another great thing to do are what are called polyvagal exercises. And I'm going to give you my website here in just a little bit, but there's a whole bunch of polyvagal exercises on there. We have something on YouTube. I'll put that link down here as well. And then, of course, the last thing that will help improve your vagal tone is to get adjusted. So our vagus nerve runs very superficially, kind of up here in our neck. So when you get adjusted, not only are we improving how your body's moving, but also improving the tone of that vagus nerve. And when we improve the tone of that vagus nerve, again, it helps your body get to that state of ease where health and healing can occur. Now, one other thing that you can do to help improve your vagal tone would be to work on those coping mechanisms that you have for the stresses in life. And I realize that's easier said than done, and in some cases may require therapy. If you feel like you're kind of that in between where not quite ready for therapy yet, a great way to do this would be to start looking at archetypal patterns in your life. And so a great resource for this I would recommend is Carolyn Mace. So her name's a little bit tricky. Last name is spelled M-Y-S-S. But she does some great work with archetypes. If you'd like to dig more into that, click the link below, and I have a whole video talking about archetypes as they pertain to the polyvagal theory. And if you're interested in archetypal consulting, let me know as well, because that's something that our office is going to be offering soon. So if you want to check out some polyvagal exercises, you can do so at our website. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I would be happy to answer those for you. So just in closing, by learning how you show up for stress in your life and those conditionings, or how you've been conditioned to deal with the stress in your life, all of that together with polyvagal exercises and chiropractic care can help you to improve your health naturally.